Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Exceed Limitless. I am Olga Binyaminov, your host, and today's episode is a heartfelt conversation about healing after breakup. Whether you are fresh from a heartbreak or still carrying old wounds, this episode is for you because it offers hope, practical wisdom, and compassionate guidance to rebuild from inside out. I am so honored to have Amy Brainard here with me. She's a certified life coach from School of Coaching. She is a tiny habits expert and a life book leader. Amy worked with so many different relationship situations. She was my coach a few years back, and she's amazing in what she does. She creates sustainable changes through small habits, and she helps people reconnect with their deepest value and design lives that they love. Amy, welcome. I am so grateful that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, Amy, breakups are often one of the life's most defining moments.
Absolutely.
Why do you think they hold so much power in our personal growth journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing about a breakup is it kind of shatters our identity. We tend to have so much of our identity wrapped up in our relationships. So it can be really jarring. It can be really, suddenly we're faced with like questioning who are we as a person? Who are we without this other person in our life? So, that's why it can be really disorienting. But how the flip side of it is, I think it's a great, fantastic opportunity to really, really connect with who we are and shift the focus on ourselves, which ironically is secret tip here. That is the key to a successful relationship. It's having an amazing relationship with ourself first. And sometimes this is what we need to get there, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. There's a lot about self, and I think throughout the month, this whole month, we talk about love and relationships. The first thing I started is the relationship with yourself. And if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, then it's definitely makes it a lot harder with the healing process, because breakups really feel like a loss, right? They feel like we really lost something so important, and we don't know, like you said, how to move on.
Yeah.
You have a program that's called Tiny Habits for Life, is all about small but sustainable changes. For someone in a very big heartbreak or a situation that they're handling, what are a few tiny habits that they could begin with?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say tiny habits are amazing because what they do is they take the brain out of the equation. And I'm sure anybody listening to this has gone, even if it's not a major breakup or end to a relationship, it's very similar to like, let's say, grief or loss. It's the same cycle of emotions, and we know that it doesn't. Our brains are kind of messed up at that time. So whether we're newly fresh into it or we're still experiencing kind of the same, it's traumatic. It's trauma. So the beauty of tiny habits is that you are doing something and you're taking action without getting your brain involved. So I'd like to frame it that way. It's like it doesn't require willpower. It really doesn't require your brain. Now, part of that, a little caveat is we do need to set up habits, small habits that aren't like emotionally charged for us. So that's something to kind of be aware of. But so we want them to be emotionally safe. We want them to be super, super easy. And so here, I'll give you a few examples and you'll see how incredibly tiny these are. Like, so a lot of times I'll suggest something like, so simple. After I brush my teeth, I will put my hand on my heart and say, I'm healing. Like that's so super small and tiny, and it doesn't require our brain to take action, if you will. And then, I mean, there's such a range, but you could do something like after I pour my coffee, I will smile for 1 second. Now that might be difficult, so you could even do after I pour my coffee, I will take one deep breath. So, I mean, these are like ridiculously simple. So easy. Another one that I recommend too is something like after I check my phone in the morning, I will text one friend or relative who makes me feel seen or makes me happy. Obviously, it wouldn't be our ex. It would be, just somebody else in our life who is supportive and just puts a smile on your face. But just that little tiny moment seems insignificant, but it increases the connection we have in our lives, which is really, really helpful when we're going through a major breakup. And I also want to point out that I think it's really important to have a gratitude practice, like super, super tiny, simple, something like, when my head hits the pillow at night or when I plug my phone in to charge at the end of the day, I will think of one thing I'm grateful for. Because that just automatically puts a little bit of positivity into our lives. And we all can, we can all, it's harder some days than others, but usually we can think of something that we're grateful for. Or it might even be, I survived today, depending on where we are.
It sounds like what you're doing is just creating that autopilot because you're doing things repetitively at specific intervals. It's like you said, brush after brushing your teeth or after pouring your coffee. So then eventually becomes part of you, right? Is that
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to point out that we want to pair our new, habit, our new tiny habit. There's a couple things I just want to highlight. You pair it with something that you're already doing. And even if you're in the throes of a really bad breakup where you want to spend the entire day in bed and it's really hard to to function, we still have to go to the bathroom. We still have to feed our pets, maybe, feed our kids. There's things that we are still doing. So that's a great time. We call it an anchor moment in the tiny habits world, but that's a great thing to tack that new habit to.
I think it's great that you're mentioning it because yes, after breakup, people really do go into mode of not wanting to do a lot of the things. And if everybody can just remember that you change best by feeling good, not
Absolutely.
and those small wins that you're talking about, those small moments, small habits, they create this momentum. And that momentum creates so much hope.
Absolutely. And that's actually the goal here is to shift your identity because
Oh,
your identity has basically just been obliterated.
yeah.
So tiny habits is a great, I look at it as like it is the foundation, it's a building block, it's the greatest stepping stone to get there because a lot of programs in my experience they have you saying platitudes or trying to convince yourself of happy butterflies and daisies, but your brain isn't really able to believe that in those moments. So tiny habits takes your brain out of the equation and allows you to take actions that are positive, that will benefit you, and you're gaining consistency in things, and consistency equals success, and success is what shapes your identity.
Yeah, that is so true. And I also noticed that a lot of people get stuck in replaying their past. So, how would you suggest that we gently shift from having those moments that we look at, the past moments, towards something that is feeling better, towards something that you want to change?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's a really common thing to happen. We've all been through it. We get stuck. We ruminate. We spin on all the things from the past. But what my training with the life coach school, really important thing. that I learned was feelings are created by your thoughts, okay? And all thoughts are optional.
Mm.
Now, it's really difficult to just kind of, decide, okay, I'm going to think something different. But tiny habits are like a step. You can do all these little things to change your identity, to change your thoughts. And, it's like one of the things that I've had happen with clients is like, they get stuck in that, just focusing on the past and the bad feelings. And so, the secret here, which I do have to admit is an advanced thing, is you have to experience your emotions. You have to live and you know what's amazing is feelings. There is no feeling out there that can kill you.
Mm.
Like any feeling, it's just a feeling and it will eventually dissipate. Now, I don't recommend wallowing it, but it's like you can do something to help you get out of it by just focusing on not asking the question, what happened? Why did this happen? But to kind of shift over to a what now?
Yeah.
What now? And and I do want to point out it's okay to, it's natural to have to spin and ruminate. That's okay as long as you can kind of learn from this. So, I sometimes even recommend like sit with the emotion, try to identify it. Like notice yourself just go, wow, I'm feeling that this it like name it. This is sadness
Mm.
and it's okay. Like that's a thought that you can have that is believable.
And I think this is so important
Your
because
brain can believe that. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just this is what will help you shift and go on and, decrease here's another thing, decrease buffering.
yeah.
And so buffering is when you're doing something else, because this is a common thing that happens, has happened with clients of mine, is, and myself, of course, is, we try to do participate in activities that protect us from feeling these emotions. And that is just a path we don't want to go down. I mean, we do to a certain degree, but it can be really like whether it be we can do like crazy stuff like, texting our ex, calling, driving by their house. That's not very productive and it's not going to get us where we want to go. But some of us might like overeat, overdrink, overshop, spend too much time just burying ourselves in something else. And so that's another reason tiny habits can be really helpful because we don't need to get our brain involved. We can take really good positive action. And so that's why I always recommend, any self-care habit is going to be a positive thing to do in these situations.
So essentially, healing isn't really getting over the situation because that might take some time. It's just integrating that experience, right? And choose peace over that thought that we're having about that.
Yeah, it's like healing isn't really um it's not the opposite of feeling. It's like we can feel the negative emotions and we can move forward at the same time. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
So it's like, but we can teach ourselves that like the more we feel the emotions, they do dissipate.
Yeah.
So it's a practice. And then I have to admit, it's kind of an advanced practice. But just by identifying what we're going through and accepting it and giving ourselves grace, that goes a long way.
For sure. And I noticed that after a breakup, many people say that, like you mentioned, their sense of identity feels shattered. So, how do habits help rebuild that sense of self?
Yeah, so it really does create consistency. And and success. And that's what we're aiming for with tiny habits because success increases our confidence.
Mm.
So that is what the basis of our identity and our self-confidence is. It's like um, and tiny habits might seem really ridiculous at the beginning. Like they're so easy, they're so simple. It's like, what possibly could this do for me? But I like to say a lot that like let's use self-care habits as an example, or any small tiny habit for that matter. It doesn't feel life-changing until they are. They don't feel life-changing until they really are. And such a little tiny thing goes such a long way. And it was kind of the missing piece. And I can say from like my own experience, when I became a coach prior to that, I was going through a really, really rough point in my marriage. And what I learned taught me, it changed my life. But it was all about changing my mindset and looking at things differently. But that's not an easy task to do just spontaneously. Like the thoughts we choose and the thoughts that run in our head, our brain has to believe them. So it's like we can't just over and over say, everything's going to be great. It's all going to work out. Like, because our brain is also in there arguing, saying, no way, this is the most devastating thing I've ever been through. And my life is over, and this good thing came to an end. That is a very difficult thing to do. So just doing something tiny, creating that pattern of consistency, that can go so far. That was like the missing ingredient to getting to that point where we can build our self-confidence enough to change our thoughts and potentially believe some new things.
Yeah, for sure. So you're building new routines, but you're like building new roots.
Hmm.
And I think it's so important. You mentioned right now that it sounds silly, that those tiny habits sound silly. But in one of my seminars I took years ago, one of the things that the seminar host said is, how teachable and coachable are you?
Yeah,
Even if it sounds or looks silly, try it. And if you think you know it all, then you'll stay where you are. But if it's as silly as it sounds, those tiny habits, combining gratitude, as you mentioned, once you put your head on the pillow, that becomes a habit. It sounds silly when we talk about it, but that's what's going to change your life. That's what's going to change
absolutely.
that thought process, because we're not starting from zero. We're starting from all we've learned throughout our lives.
Yeah. I want to, if it's okay if I interject, sorry to do this, but like when I mentioned things like adding up to be big, I recently read somewhere, and to me, this was like mind blowing. If you save just $8 a day, you'll have $3,000 in your bank account in a year. If you read 20 pages a day, that equals 30 books a year. If you walk 10,000 steps a day, you will have done 70 marathons. Like to me, that's just like, mind blowing,
Yeah,
amazing.
yes, it
That
is.
one little tiny thing can lead to such major changes in your life.
That's the power of tiny habits. And it's so important that even though it sounds silly and it sounds so small, that you realize how important and significant it is for your life.
Yeah.
Now,
I
sometimes,
often I give a tip to my client. If you the way to tell if your habit that you choose to focus on is tiny enough is if it feels so ridiculous that it can't possibly make a difference, it's like you're on the right track. That's a good tiny habit to start with because they naturally blossom and grow once you have consistency and once you celebrate your successes. That changes your whole identity.
and I'm glad you're mentioning that it accumulates, because really the reason we're focusing on tiny habits, because sometimes we plan some big habit that you want to do, but it's hard to make the first step, especially for someone who is might be a procrastinator or someone that says, I'll do it tomorrow. When you have those little steps, it really makes a big difference because you have something to build on. Sometimes breakups also disrupt our daily routine, like you mentioned before, or future planning because it seems like everything collapsed and your life is now different. And if you have some things that you've been doing, you can no longer do that because you're in this mode. So, what advice do you give someone who have lost a partner and now they feel like they lost the structure?
Yeah, well, okay, that's a great question because, we can, it's possible to create a predictable moment in your day. That's one thing I want to point out. So, I mean, it could be as simple as lighting a candle at dinner. That could be a great little, just something you just want to get some predictability, consistency. But you can also, like I mentioned earlier, you can pair any habit you want to bring into your life with something. I guarantee you there's still things you're already doing. Like we mentioned, you're going to the bathroom, but still things like drinking water, that's something that we might neglect to do when our whole life has been disrupted. So that's a great thing. It could be as simple as, every time I look at my phone to check text messages, I can take a sip of water. Or your habit might just be to fill up your glass of water when you first get out of bed or something like that. And if you're really having trouble even doing the things that you have always done, I would recommend trying to pair a habit with something centered around, something else you have to care for. If you have kids, you're not going to neglect them in most cases. You are as hard as it is to function in those moments, we still have pets, kids, relatives that we care about. So, you could attach something to caring for others, even when we're having a real difficult time taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember is that when we go through that heartbreak, when we go through that situation when we don't want to do anything, you're basically going on an empty cup and you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
So storing all of those routines and you're doing all of those habits for yourself because filling your own cup first is what allows you to move forward and be able to do certain things that seem very impossible at this moment, right?
Yeah, and we can all logically understand that and comprehend that, but sometimes it's just really hard to do that. So that would be the case where I might suggest focus on somebody else. Focus
Mhm.
on your pet even. Focus on a plant you have in your house. It's like it's sometimes easier to force ourselves to get out of bed when we need to water our plant or feed our kitty.
Yeah, and there's actually a fine line between healthy reflection and that feeling of heartbreak versus unhealthy attachment to the
Mhm.
past. How can someone tell the difference between those two?
Well, it's totally normal, first of all, to go through that. So I want to just encourage everybody, have grace with yourself. It's almost like uh, mourning. It's everybody goes through a different process, and we never know how it's going to personally affect us until we're in that situation. But so the first thing I want to say is have grace, understand, don't be too hard on yourself. But if you get into these thought loops, my recommendation is pay attention and notice. Are you gaining, are you learning from it? Just try to step back a little bit. If you're doing all of this looping and ruminating, just sort of question, what have I learned?
Yeah.
You know, am I is this unhealthy attachment and I feel stuck? Or, if I'm able to like get some insights, even if it's as simple as like, this is the emotion I'm feeling, or, you know, can I at this point say, okay, this is what I'm experiencing, but what now? What can I learn from this? Yeah, and if you're going through the crazy, I've had a lot of clients go through the crazy behavior patterns and buffering, like I mentioned before. Give tiny habits a shot, because what it does is it takes the brain out of the equation, and you don't have to rely on your brain to be in a logical state. Just do something so ridiculously simple and easy that you create some success in your life. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes the mind is just confused between holding on and caring. Like we sometimes don't know the difference. And real care really involves letting go. You got to let go to be able to start the healing process. And those unhealthy attachments are really something that you have to be able to identify in order to be able to move forward. Amy, you're also a certified Lifebook Leader, and Lifebook is a program that me and you both have done several years back, and that's why I'm doing my podcasts and monthly programs on a monthly basis with a different topic. So, like I said, June is the love and relationship, which is pretty much from the Lifebook leading program. How do you redefine your vision with love and relationship that support that healing after a heartbreak?
Yeah, well, Lifebook is a great program to do this. I found in my experience that Lifebook is one of the few programs or teachings where it's not somebody, some guru, some expert saying, this is what worked for me and this is what you should do. It's like you truly dig in and figure out what you truly want. So when you're ready for this, I can't recommend that enough, because you dig really deep into what you want and where you want to go from here. So I would recommend, when you're at that point where you've been entertaining that what now question, this is a great place to start. I mean, it's just a fantastic, gives you a lot of insight. And, generally, and this is one thing that may be helpful depending on what stage you're at in the whole grieving the relationship process. But we tend to, when we can open ourselves up to the future and start shifting our focus more to that, I think it's important to recognize that every time we go through a new relationship, we tend to at least know more. We've learned more about ourselves. It's possible that the next iteration of your relationship could be that much better than the past. So, this is a great way to do it. And, I also want to say that there is a specific podcast that I've recommended in the past a lot. It's from the Life Coach School. So, the woman who trained me, her name is Brooke Castillo. She has this podcast that's just called the Life Coach School podcast. But she has an episode called Want Match. I don't know if it's wants or want. I think it's want match. Um, and it has this great concept that, and it really, really explains this was life changing for me and for my marriage, that we have to be completely, not completely whole, but we have to take care of our own needs and first. And the purpose of a relationship is not to complete us. There's nobody out there that can complete us or make us happy. If we can take responsibility for doing that on our own, then anybody we meet is like, it's just, we can come together and be a partnership and enjoy each other's company, and it's just icing on the cake. It's where relationships fail is when we have an expectation that we are going to get something from them. And I think, oh gosh, I, I had it up on my computer because I was looking at it before, but I think it's episode 296. That's the want match. So if anyone's interested, it's just this was blowing and life changing for me with my relationships. Just this concept of like the what the purpose of a relationship really is. It's not to we can't gain something from it. I mean, a partner, I think about how difficult it is for ourselves to have self-confidence and boost ourselves up.
Yeah.
Another person to do it, I mean, we good luck. They're always going to fail. So when we can buy into this, I mean, for me, it was just completely life-changing. So that whole idea of kind of accepting that our relationship is not going to fix us. It's not going to make us happy. We
Right.
can choose to be happy because of things going on in the relationship, but it's not anything that can permanently do that. It has to come from within first.
In other words, don't give your power away. No relationship makes you whole, as you said, and it's really just you that makes it. And I think when you design that new future, like we did in Lifebook, and I actually offer something very similar to teenagers and to adults to kind of be able to look at their life and see what they want, it creates that excitement.
Yeah.
And it just makes you want to move forward on whatever life holds for you. It empowers your progress. It gives you, instead of that painful feeling, it just gives you some hope.
Yeah. And think about it, Olga, when we have like I'm sure we can all identify with having a friend that is kind of like draining or they're always wanting, they have expectations and how hard it is to be with that person. It's so much easier to be with people who just are happy, they're doing their own thing. They're secure with what they want. They don't expect anything from us. It's basically that same way in a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, taking it to closure, closure is something that many of us seek after a breakup, especially if it was, a long time. And once you get that closure, do you think closure is something we find, or is it something that we actually create?
Oh, we definitely create it. We definitely create it. And I'd say that it comes from we can close things out when we accept what is.
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't mean that we're never going to have the negative feelings. It's just we accept it and we're willing to at that point look, forward and accept what is and start focusing on what's next.
Yeah.
So it's like it's an act of self-love. Closure is like, we're not closing the door and shutting it behind us. It's like we're just open at that point to, even if that door is open a little crack, we're willing to open the door to the future and put one, stick our toe in, stick our leg in. It's like they can kind of both be there at the same time, but it's that point where we just become accepting of like, this is how I'm feeling. This was a loss. I'm grieving. That's okay. But I've gained some skills. I feel um, I've accepted what's going on right now. That's the point where we can kind of open that door and move forward.
That is so true because closure, like you said, is really a decision. It's a mindset shift. And it's more than just a moment or a conversation. You're not going to get closure just by talking about it. It
Yeah.
takes courage, it takes strength, it takes mindset shift to say and accept the situation, learn from it, and really move forward. Now, one more thing that I know through breakups, some people just jump very quickly to another relationship after breakup. And I've learned somewhere, I read somewhere, you don't get over someone by getting under someone else. And I think this is so important because many people after breakup, they feel that emptiness, they feel they're not whole. So by going and generating a new relationship, not being ready for the relationship, which creates another chaos, another heartbreak, and so on. So, what would be your advice about balancing that healing time with moving on? Is there a time frame, and how would one know that they're ready for continuation.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's a specific time frame. Everybody's different, but I do not recommend jumping into something next until you really take that pause and accept what is and build up your relationship with yourself. So, it's like healing and moving on are not opposites.
Yeah.
It's like it's not one or the other. We can be doing both at the same time, but my litmus test is being able to not just focus on why did this breakup happen or why did this relationship end, but to start recognizing and looking forward and say, what have I learned? What am I learning? That type of those questions and moving, looking, like being able to focus is a really good indicator that you might be ready to delve into something else. You know, and again, tiny habits, have to put the plug in. That's a great tool to build and increase your relationship with yourself. So I recommend strongly, and you can do that the whole time that you're getting out there, maybe trying to connect with others. It could all happen. Everybody's different, but just being brutally honest with yourself and paying attention and trying to recognize that you are not just, you're willing to accept the things that happened and question what it is you want in the future.
I love that you mentioned that there's no time frame because it's a great reminder that healing is not a race. You're not rushing anywhere. The first thing you got to do is really reconnect with you first so that your next relationship is really based on you being whole so you don't need someone else to be whole. And one thing I've learned myself through my breakup and through my healing process, when we come from a place of need that versus want, it's not healthy. You don't need a relationship. You want a relationship. You don't
100%.
you don't need a partner. You want a partner. Needing comes from a place of lack. And if you're lacking something, it's so hard to get it from someone else, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that difference. So last question, Amy. What is one tiny habit or one mindset shift or one a book quote or a book that you would recommend for someone that is healing right now from a breakup?
Ooh, okay, good question. I have a few thoughts on this. Obviously, Tiny Habits by Dr. BJ Fogg. Can't say enough about this. I mean, the book itself really, if anybody is curious about practicing this, the book is great. It spells it all out. It's very simple, very easy to understand. Um, Another thing is I would welcome anybody who is interested or curious about it. Since I right now am coaching within the Tiny Habits program, you could email me and I'd be more than happy to put you into one of my weekly cohorts. We do this, it's like an email coaching program, but I teach you what you need to know in conjunction with Dr. Fogg, who it's all scientifically founded or based. He's amazing. He's a professor at Stanford, and he runs the behavior design lab at Stanford. He created it, and so he put together this coaching program. It's phenomenal. And if anybody wants to email me at amybrainard.com, or I'm sorry, Amy, that's different. Amy Brainard at yahoo.com is my business email. And just say, I'm interested in joining one of your Tiny Habits cohorts. I will send back, what the availability is. So
So we'll make
that's
it even easier. Right after this conversation, I will add that link. And if you put on the subject line exceed, then Amy will know that you're coming from this program that would be easier for her to know
perfect.
for. Yes.
Absolutely.
So the
Absolutely. I mentioned the Brooke Castillo podcast, the Life Coach School podcast, and that has so much. I mean, that was life-changing for me. So much good stuff in there. She isn't for everybody. She's very direct, but give it a shot. I usually recommend that people go back to episode 1 and move forward because she kind of builds on her concepts. But and I also want to point out she started off as a weight loss coach. That's how I found her because I was interested in weight loss. But the things that, and you can skip over the weight loss material that she has, but she has some pure gold when it comes to relationships, taking action. I mean, so much great information. But even interestingly, even the podcast she has on weight loss, it really lends itself to, she bases it on like how we experience urges, and it's training for experiencing your feelings. So it can be super helpful with breakups, relationships, any kind of buffering you're doing if you're going through a breakup and you're, overeating, over drinking. It's all this, it can all be applicable. So I do recommend that. And then, I think those are my big things, but in terms of any habit or anything you do initially, gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. It's so easy and so simple. And that is, I think, the number one thing that can help us in our deepest, darkest moments to keep going. So even if you can be grateful that you survived another day, that can be really powerful. Start with that and see where it goes. That's what I would recommend.
This is so interesting that you're saying gratitude. Actually, my post from last night was being grateful for what you have multiplies what you have to have even more of that. So that's definitely,
Absolutely.
definitely correct. And it's so beautiful that you've connected that to this podcast. I hope everybody has the podcast name, but I will post it again on the comments. I want to leave our listeners with this quote by Brené Brown. Owning our story and loving ourselves through the through the process is the bravest thing that you've ever do. And I think it's
Absolutely.
so important to realize that healing is a process. Amy, thank you so much for being such a grounding presence today. Your insights are so gently reminding us that healing doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be soft, it can be intentional, and actually designed with who we are becoming.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And to the listeners, if you are in the middle of a heartbreak, please know you are not broken. You are becoming. And each small choice you make, each tiny habit you try is a declaration. I choose to heal. I choose myself. And as Amy beautifully teaches, your next chapter isn't something that you stumble into, it's something that you design with clarity, with love. And if you're feeling that you moved today by our conversation, please send it to a friend who needs a little bit light. And I invite you all to join the community where our conversations continue. Please remember, healing is so much more powerful when we do it together. Amy, thank you so much. You are such a gift.
Well, it's completely my pleasure.
And until next time, remember, your heart knows the way and you are strong enough to follow it. Take care and keep exceeding all of your limits.